Live. I'm live. Okay. So I'm early tonight. What time I did last night? I guess I should set a time, but it's hard for me to do that because I get distracted easy and I might not make it on time. But I'm feeling a little tired tonight. My chronic fatigue is kicking in, so I wasn't sure I'd be able to last. I mean, I'm going to do a couple of chapters tonight um, of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, and I realized I spelt his last name wrong. It's two S's, and so I don't know why I didn't notice that or catch it. So I went through and corrected and updated all my videos, and the I also have a folder, a playlist. So the title. So I apologize for that. Um, Also, the other thing yesterday, I was looking up. There was a part in there where it says if you give an inch, they take. Usually, the saying is "give an inch, take a mile," and there was this word there, ELL, and I couldn't find it because it was Old English, and so I looked it up after I got off as Old English, and I found it, and what it is in Old English, the word, and it's not pronounced ELL, like L, it's pronounced Elna, Elna. So the word Elna, referring to the unit of measurement or the forearm arm, was derived from the Proto-Germanic Alino and typically appeared as Elna. Oh, okay, so Alino, Elna or Eln. It was pronounced with a short E sound similar to the modern bed. So, oh, Ed, oh, Elna. It's weird. Followed by a distinct L and often a vowel sound, likely pronounced as L or nah. I bet like the Pennsylvania Dutch, I'm sorry, the Amish, they don't speak English. They speak a form of German or Dutch, which is like a hybrid. I wonder if they use that word and they would pronounce it the way it's supposed to be pronounced. But it does mean a unit of measurement, and it's a unit of measurement from like the tips of your finger to your elbow. So, and now we say well, that my mom used to say, I'll give you an inch and you take a mile. But it's meant the forearm, the length of the arm, becoming, later becoming a measurement. So I figured it was something along those lines, but I wasn't sure. I mean, I probably just spent way too much time on that, but because there's a lot of words that we don't typically use anymore in here in the English language. We cut out a lot, and also cutting out even more because now, when texting started, and um, there was only so many characters. I mean, now you can do more characters, but the platforms were set up for a minimum amount of characters. So if you wanted to get something in, you just use the first letter of a word for a whole sentence. So they cut it back even more. So there's always evolution or evolving of the English language or devolving of the English language. So look at it both ways. I don't see any evolution. I see it, you know, shortcuts. Everything has to be shortcuts. Anyway, so tonight I'm going to be reading chapter 9, and then we'll see how far we go with that. I don't know about anybody else. We didn't really get it. We didn't get any snow here. I don't even think we got rain. We got nothing. It was a sunny, warmish kind of day. Even though it was 45, it didn't really feel like 45. It felt colder. But anyway, so enough of my jibber jabbering. I'm going to begin with chapter 9. So, where we left off, he was being shipped out. He was going from um, Baltimore to head for St. Michael's in the sloop called Amanda, because the slave owners died, and then the slave owners' children died, and I think the brother-in-law or son-in-law got just and then everything was all the property, and they considered say slaves included in that property had to be divvied up to whoever. So he was once again yanked from Baltimore, and they put him on a ship, and he was afraid he's not going to be able to ever escape. So he's on the ship, thinking about when that came, I was determined to be off. So he's thinking about the stops in Philadelphia. Oh, I guess I could take that down a little bit. I just brightened up the screen for no reason. And it just makes my glasses, because I have those transition glasses, so it makes them look pink. Well, that's not a bad color. The transition is purple. Okay, there we go. Chapter 9 of the life of the narrative of life, narrative of, oh, here, this is going to be narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. Here we go, page 51. Chapter 9. I have now reached a period of my life when I can give dates. I left Baltimore and went to live with Master Thomas Ould at St. Michael's in March of 1832. It was now more than 7 years since I lived with him in the family of my old master on Colonel Lloyd's plantation. We, of course, were now almost entire strangers to each other. Okay, I got to read that again. I have now reached a period of my life when I can give dates. I left Baltimore and went to live with Master Thomas Ould at St. Michael's in March 1832. It was now more than 7 years since I lived with him in the family of my old master on Colonel Lloyd's plantation. We, of course, were now almost entire strangers to each other. He was to me a new master, and I to him a new slave. I was ignorant of his temper and disposition. He was equally so of mine. A very short time, however, brought us into full acquaintance with each other. I was made acquainted with his wife not less than with himself. They were well matched, being equally mean and cruel. I was now for the first time during a space of more than 7 years made to feel the painful gnawings of hunger, a something which I had not experienced before since I left Colonel Lloyd's plantation. It was hard enough with me then, when I could look back to no period at which I had enjoyed a sufficiency. It was tenfold. I'm trying to get comfortable here. It was tenfold harder after living in Master Hugh's family, where I had always had enough to eat, and that of which was good. So, not used to getting enough to eat, and then getting enough to eat, now going back to not enough to eat. I have said Master Thomas was a mean man. He was so. Not to give a slave enough to eat is regarded as the most aggravated development of meanness, even among slaveholders. The rule is, no matter how coarse the food, only let there be enough of it. This is the theory, and in part of Maryland from which I came, it is general practice, though there are many exceptions. Master Thomas gave us enough of neither coarse nor fine food. There were 4 slaves of us in the kitchen: my sister Eliza, my aunt Priscilla, Henny, and myself. We were allowed less than half of a bushel of cornmeal per week and very little else, either in the shape of meat or vegetables. It was not enough for us to subsist upon. We were therefore reduced to the wretched necessity of living at the expense of our neighbors. This we did by begging and stealing, whichever came in handy in the time of need, the one being considered as legitimate as the other. A great many times have we poor creatures been nearly perishing with hunger when food in abundance lay mouldering in the safe and smokehouse, and our pious mistress was aware of the fact. And yet that mistress and her husband would kneel every morning and pray that God would bless them in basket and store. Like, how do they even sleep at night, these people? Even today, like with all that's going, how do you even sleep at night? How? How? Bad as all slaveholders are, we seldom meet one destitute of every element of character commanding respect. My master was one of this rare sort. I do not know of one single noble act ever performed by him. The leading trait in his character was meanness, and if there were any other element in his nature, it was made subject to this. He was mean, and like most other mean men, he lacked the ability to conceal his meanness. Captain Old was not born a slaveholder. He had been a poor man, master only of a bay craft. He came into possession of all his slaves by marriage, and of all men, adopted slaveholders are the worst. He was cruel but cowardly. Well, they're all cowards. He commanded without firmness. In the enforcement of his rules, he was at times rigid and at times lax. At times he spoke to his slaves with the firmness of Napoleon and the fury of a demon. At other times he might well be mistaken for an inquirer who had lost his way. He did nothing of himself. He might have passed for a lion but for his ears. In all things noble which he attempted, his own meanness shone most conspicuous. His airs, words, and actions were the airs, words, and actions of born slaveholders, and being assumed were awkward enough. He was not even a good imitator. He possessed all the disposition to deceive, but wanted the power. Having no resources within himself, he was compelled to be the copyist of many, and being such, he was forever the victim of inconsistency, and of consequence he was an object of contempt, and was held at such even by his slaves. The luxury of having slaves of his own to wait upon him was something new and unprepared for. He was a slaveholder without the ability to hold slaves. He found himself incapable of managing his slaves either by force, fear, or fraud. We seldom called him master. We generally called him Captain Old, and were hardly disposed to title him at all. I doubt not that our conduct had much to do with making him appear awkward, and of consequence fretful. Our want of reverence for him must have perplexed him greatly. He wished to have us call him master, but lacked the firmness necessary to command us to do so. His wife used to insist upon our calling him so, but to no purpose. In August 1832, my master attended a Methodist camp meeting held in the Bayside, Talbot County, and there experienced religion. Trying to get these. Hang on one second. I indulged a. Come on. I indulged a faint hope that his conversion would lead him to emancipate his slaves, and that, if he did not do this, it would at any rate make him more kind and humane. Fat chance, really. I was disappointed in both these respects. It neither made him to be humane to his slaves nor to emancipate them. If it had any effect on his character, it made him more cruel and hateful in all his ways. For I believed him to have been a much worse man after his conversion than before. Prior to his conversion, he relied upon his own depravity to shield and sustain him in his savage barbarity. But after his conversion, he found religious sanction and support for his slave holding cruelty. So yeah, they interpret the Bible to fit their depravity. He made the greatest pretensions to piety. His house was the house of prayer. He prayed morning, noon, and night. He very soon distinguished himself among his brethren, and was soon made a class leader and an exhorter. His activity in revivals was great, and he proved himself an instrument in the hands of the church in converting many souls. His house was the preacher's home. They used to take great pleasure in coming there to put up. For while he starved us, he stuffed them. We have had 3 or 4 preachers there at a time. The names of those who used to come most frequently while I lived there, were Mr. Storks, Mr. Ewry, Mr. Humphrey, and Mr. Hickey. I have also seen Mr. George Cookman at our house. We slaves loved Mr. Cookman. We believed him to be a good man. We thought him instrumental in getting Mr. Samuel Harrison, a very rich holder, to emancipate his slaves, and by some means got the impression that he was laboring to effect the emancipation of all the slaves. When he was at our house, we were sure to be called into prayers. When the others were there, we were sometimes called in and sometimes not. Mr. Cookman took more notice of us than either of the other ministers. He could not come among us without betraying his sympathy for us, and stupid as we were, we had the sagacity to see it. Sagacity to see it. While I lived with my master in St. Michael's, let's just pin that right there. There we go. While I lived there with my master in St. Michael's, there was a white young man, a Mr. Wilson, who proposed to keep a Sabbath school for the instruction of such slaves as might be disposed to learn to read the New Testament. We met but 3 times, when Mr. West and Mr. Fairbanks, both class leaders, with many others, came upon us with sticks and other missiles, drove us off, and forbade us to meet again. Thus ended our little Sabbath school in the pious town of St. Michael's. Yeah, because, of course, we know why. It's just so sick how they, use religion as a shield and a sword. I mean, and they still do it. I have said my master found religious sanction for his cruelty. As an example, I will state one of many facts going to prove the charge. I have seen him tie up a lame young woman and whip her with a heavy cowskin upon her naked shoulders, causing the warm red blood to drip. And in justification of the bloody deed, he would quote this passage of Scripture: "He that knoweth his master's will doeth it not, shall be beaten with many stripes." See, children's sword, whatever. And I did forget to do a trigger warning, because this is about the barbarity of slavery, as told by Frederick Douglass, a former slave. Master would keep this lacerated young woman tied up in this horrid situation 4 or 5 hours at a time. I have known him to tie her up early in the morning and whip her before breakfast. Leave her, go to his store, return at dinner, and whip her again, cutting her in the places already made raw with his cruel lash. It's just the secret of master's cruelty toward. Let's see if I can. Oh, I'm going backwards on it. The secret of the master's cruelty towards Henny is found in the fact of her being almost helpless. When quite a child, she fell into the fire and burned herself horribly. Her hands were so burnt that she never got the use of them. She could do very little but bear heavy burdens. She was to master a bill of expense, and as he was a mean man, she was a constant offense to him. He seemed desirous of getting the poor girl out of existence. He gave her away once to his sister, but being a poor gift, she was not disposed to keep her. Finally, my benevolent master, to use his own words, set her adrift to take care of herself. Here was a recently converted man holding on upon the mother and at the same time turning out her helpless child to starve and to die. Master Thomas was one of the many pious slaveholders who hold slaves for the very charitable purpose of taking care of them. My master and myself had quite a number of differences. He found me unsuitable to his purpose. My city life, he said, had had a very pernicious effect upon me. It had almost ruined me for every good purpose, and fitted me for everything which was bad. One of my greatest faults was that of letting his horse run away and go down to his father in law's farm, which was about 5 miles from St. Michael's. I would then have to go after it. My reason for this kind of carelessness or carefulness was that I could always get something to eat when I was there. Master William Hamilton, my master's father-in-law, always gave his slaves enough to eat. I never left there hungry. No matter how great the need of my speedy return, Master Thomas at length said he would stand it no longer. I had lived with him 9 months, during which time he had given me a number of severe whippings, all to no good purpose. He resolved to put me out, as he said, to be broken, and for this purpose he let me for 1 year to a man named Edward Covey. Mr. Covey was a poor man, a farm renter. He rented a place upon which he lived, as also the hands with which he tilled it. Mr. Covey had acquired a very high reputation for breaking young slaves. This reputation was of immense value to him. It enabled him to get his farm tilled with much less expense to himself than he could have had done it without such a reputation. Some slaveholders thought it not much loss to allow Mr. Covey to have their slaves 1 year, for the sake of the training to which they were subjected, without any other compensation. He could hire young help with great ease in consequence of this reputation. Added to the natural good qualities of Mr. Covey, he was a professor of religion, a pious soul, a member and class leader in the Methodist Church. All of this added weight to his reputation as a end breaker. Not saying that word. I was aware of all the facts, having been made acquainted with them by a young man who had lived there. I nonetheless made the change gladly, for I was sure of getting enough to eat, which is not the smallest consideration to a hungry man. I keep going the wrong way on this. There we go. Chapter 10. All right, let me get situated here again. because I'm kind of cramped up. All right, here we go. Sip of tea. It is not my chamomile tea, it's my chai tea. All right, chapter 10. I left Master Thomas's house and went to live with Mr. Covey on the 1st of January, 1833. I was now, for the first time in my life, a field hand. In my new employment, I found myself even more awkward than a country boy appeared to be in a large city. I had been at my new home but 1 week before Mr. Covey gave me a very severe whipping, cutting my back, causing the blood to run, and raising ridges on my flesh as large as my little finger. The details of this affair are as follows. Mr. Covey sent me very early in the morning of one of our coldest days in the month of January to the woods to get a load of wood. He gave me a team of unbroken oxen. He told me which one was the in-hand ox and which the off-hand one. He then tied the end of a large rope around the horns of the in-hand ox, gave me the other end of it, and told me if the oxen started to run that I must hold on upon the rope. I had never driven oxen before, and of course I was very awkward. I, however, succeeded in getting to the edge of the woods with little difficulty, but I had got a very few rods into the woods when the oxen took fright and started to full tilt, carrying the cart against the trees and over stumps in the most frightful manner. I expected every moment that my brains would be dashed out against the trees. After running thus for a considerable distance, they finally upset the cart, dashing it with great force against a tree, and threw themselves into a dense thicket. How I escaped death, I do not know. There I was, entirely alone in a thick wood, in a place new to me. My cart was upset and shattered. My oxen were entangled among the young trees, and there was none to help me. After a long spell of effort, I succeeded in getting my cart righted, my oxen detangled, and again yoked to the cart. I now proceeded with my team to the place where I had the day before been chopping wood, and loaded my cart pretty heavily, thinking in this way to tame my oxen. I then proceeded on my way home. I had now consumed one half of the day. I got out of the wood safely and now felt out of danger. I stopped my oxen to open the woods gate, and just as I did so, before I could get hold of my ox rope, the oxen again started, rushed through the gate, catching it between the wheel and the body of the cart, tearing it to pieces, and then coming within a few inches of crushing me against the gate post. Thus, twice in one short day, I escaped death by the merest chance. On my return, I told Mr. Covey what had happened and how it happened. He ordered me to return to the woods again immediately. I did so, and he followed on after me. Just as I got into the woods, he came up and told me to stop my cart, and then he would teach me how to trifle away my time and break gates. He then went to a large gum tree and with his axe cut 3 large switches, and again trimming them up neatly with his pocket knife, he ordered me to take off my clothes. I made him no answer, but stood with my clothes on. He repeated his order. I still made him no answer, nor did I move to strip myself. Upon this, he rushed me. Hang on 1 second. He rushed at me with the fierceness of a tiger, tore off my clothes, and lashed me till he had worn out his switches, cutting me so savagely as to leave the marks visible for a long time after. This whipping was the first of a number just like it, and for similar offenses. I lived with Mr. Covey 1 year. During the first 6 months of that year, scarce a week passed without his whipping me. I was seldom free from a sore back. My awkwardness was almost always his excuse for whipping me. We were worked fully up to the point of endurance. Long before day, we were up, our horses fed, and by the first approach of day, we were off to the field with our hoes and plowing teams. Mr. Covey gave us enough to eat, but scarce time to eat it. We were often less than 5 minutes taking our meals. We were often in the field from the first approach of day till its last lingering ray had left us. And at saving fodder time, midnight, then often caught us in the field binding blades. Covey would be out with us. The way he used to stand, the way he used to stand it was this. He would spend the most of his afternoons in bed. He would then come out fresh in the evening, ready to urge us on with his words, example, and frequently with the whip. Mr. Covey was one of the few slaveholders who could and did work with his hands. He was a hard-working man. He knew by himself just what a man or a boy could do. There was no deceiving him. His work went on in absence almost as well as in his presence, and he had the faculty of making us feel that he was ever present with us. This he did by surprising us. Oops, I just accidentally went. Oh. I have a different view. That's why I'm a little slow on. This he did by surprising us. He seldom approached the spot where we were at work openly, if he could do it secretly. He always aimed at taking us by surprise. Such was his cunning that we used to call him among ourselves the snake. When we were at work in the cornfield, he would sometimes crawl on his hands and knees to avoid detection. It's weird, people. And all at once he would rise nearly in our midst and scream out, "Ha, ha, come, come, dash on, dash on." This being his mode of attack, it was never safe to stop a single minute. His comings were like a thief in the night. He appeared to us as being ever at hand. He was under every tree, behind every stump, in every bush, and at every window on the plantation. He would sometimes mount his horse as if bound to St. Michael's, a distance of 7 miles, and in half an hour afterwards you would see him coiled up in the corner of the wood fence, watching every motion of the slaves. What a creepy, creepy, evil creepiness. He would do this for purpose. He would, for this purpose, leave his horse tied up in the woods. Again, he would sometimes walk up to us and give us orders as though he was upon the point of starting on a long journey, turn his back upon us, and make as though he was going to the house to get ready. And before he would get halfway thither, he would turn short and crawl into a fence corner or behind some tree, and there watch us till the going down of the sun. Mr. Covey's forte consisted in his power to deceive. His life was devoted to planning and perpetrating the grossest deceptions. Everything he possessed in the shape of learning or religion, he made conform to his disposition to deceive. He seemed to think himself equal to deceiving the Almighty. He would make a short prayer. He would make a short prayer in the morning and a long prayer at night. And strange as it may seem, few men at times appear more devotional than he. The exercises of his family devotions were always commenced with singing, and as he was a very poor singer himself, the duty of raising the hymn generally came upon me. He would read his hymn and nod at me to commence. I would at times do so, at others I would not. My non-compliance would almost always produce much confusion. To show himself independent of me, he would start and stagger through his hymn in the most discordant manner. In this state of mind, he prayed with more than ordinary spirit. Poor man, such was his disposition and success at deceiving. I do verily believe that he sometimes deceived himself into the solemn belief that he was a sincere worshiper of the Most High God. And this, too, at a time when he may be said to have been guilty of compelling his woman slave to commit the sin of adultery. The facts in the case are these. Mr. Covey was a poor man. He was just commencing in life. He was only able to buy one slave, and shocking as is the fact, he bought her, as he said, for a breeder. This woman was named Caroline. Mr. Covey bought her from Mr. Thomas Lowe, about 6 miles from St. Michael's. She was a large, able-bodied woman, about 20 years old. She had already given birth to one child, which proved her to be just what he wanted. And after buying her, he hired a married man of Mr. Samuel Harrison to live with him 1 year. And him he used to fasten up with her every night. The result was that at the end of the year, the miserable woman gave birth to twins. At this result, Mr. Covey seemed to be highly pleased, both with the man and the wretched woman. Such was his joy and that of his wife that nothing they can do for Caroline during her confinement was too good or too hard to be done. The children were regarded as being quite an addition to his wealth. If at any one time of my life more than another I was made to drink the bitterest dregs of slavery, that time was during the first 6 months of my stay with Mr. Covey. We were worked in all weathers. It was never too hot or too cold. It would never rain, blow, hail, or snow too hard for us to work in the field. Work, work, work was scarcely more the order of the day than of the night. The longest days were too short for him, and the shortest nights were too long for him. I was somewhat unmanageable when I first went there, but a few months of this discipline tamed me. Mr. Covey succeeded in breaking me. I was broken in body, soul, and spirit. My natural elasticity was crushed. My intellect languished, and the disposition to read departed. The cheerful spark that lingered about my eye died. The dark night of slavery closed in upon me, and behold a man transformed into a brute. Sunday was my only leisure time. I spent this in a sort of beast-like stupor, between sleep and wake, under some large tree. At times I would rise up. A flash of energetic freedom would dart through my soul, accompanied with a faint beam of hope that flickered for a moment, then vanished. I sank down again, mourning over my wretched condition. I was sometimes prompted to take my life, and that of Covey, but... hang on. But, come on. Was prevented by a combination of hope and fear. My sufferings on this plantation seem now like a dream rather than a stern reality. Our house stood within a few rods of the Chesapeake Bay, whose broad bosom was ever white with sails from every quarter of the habitable globe. Those beautiful vessels, robed in purest white, so delightful to the eye of freemen, were to me so many shrouded ghosts, to terrify and torment me with thoughts of my wretched condition. I have often, in the deep stillness of a summer's Sabbath, stood all alone upon the lofty banks of that noble bay, and traced with saddened heart and tearful eye the countless number of sails moving off to the mighty ocean. The sight of those always affected me powerfully. My thoughts would compel utterance, and there was no audience but the Almighty. That was a loud car or bike. I would pour out my soul's complaint in my rude way with an apostrophe to the moving multitude of ships. I'm going to read that again. My thoughts would compel utterance, and there, with no audience but the Almighty, I would pour out my soul's complaint in my rude way with an apostrophe to the moving multitude of ships. You are loosed from your moorings and are free. I am fast in my chains and am a slave. You move merrily before the gentle gale, and I sadly before the bloody whip. You are freedom's swift wing angels that fly around the world. I am confined in the bands of iron. Oh, that I were free. Oh, that I were on one of your gallant decks and under your protecting wing. Alas, betwixt me and you, the turbid waters roll. Go on, go on. Oh, that I could also go. Could I but swim, if I could fly. Oh, why was I born a man of whom to make a brute? The glad ship is gone. She hides in the dim distance. I am left in the hottest hell of unending slavery. Oh God, save me. God, deliver me. Let me be free. Is there any God? Why am I a slave? I will run away. I will not stand it. Get caught or get clear. I'll try it. I had as well die with ag as the fever. I have only one life to lose. I had as well be killed running as die standing. Only think of it. 100 miles straight north and I am free. Try it? Yes. God helping me, I will. It cannot be that I shall live and die a slave. I will take to the water. This very bay shall yet bear me into freedom. The steamboat steer into a northeast course from North Pole Point. I will do the same, and when I get to the head of the bay, I will turn my canoe adrift and walk straight through Delaware into Pennsylvania. When I get there, I shall not be required to have a pass. I can travel without being disturbed. Let but the first opportunity offer, and come what will, I am off. Meanwhile, I will try to bear up under the yoke. I am not the only slave in the world. Why should I fret? I can bear as much as any of them. Besides, I am but a boy, and all boys are bound to someone. It may be that my misery in slavery will only increase my happiness when I get free. There is a better day coming. Thus I used to think, and thus I used to speak to myself, goaded almost to madness at one moment, and at the next reconciling myself to my wretched lot. I have already intimated that my condition was much worse during the first 6 months of my stay at Mr. Covey's than in the last 6. The circumstances leading to the change in Mr. Covey's course toward me form an epoch in my humble history. You have seen how a man was made a slave. You shall see how a slave was made a man. On one of the hottest days on the month of August 1833, Bill Smith, William Hughes, a slave named Eli, and myself were engaged in fanning wheat. Hughes was clearing the fan wheat from before the fan. Eli was turning, Smith was feeding, and I was carrying wheat to the fan. The work was simple, requiring strength rather than intellect. Yet to one entirely unused to such work, it came very hard. At about 3 o'clock of that day, I broke down. My strength failed me. I was seized with the violent aching of the head, attended with extreme dizziness. I trembled in every limb. Finding what was coming, I nerved myself up feeling it would never do to stop work. I stood as long as I could stagger to the hopper with grain. When I could stand no longer, I fell and felt as if held down by an immense weight. The fan, of course, stopped. Everyone had its own work to do, and no one could do the work of the other and have his own go on at the same time. Mr. Covey was at the house, about 100 yards from the treading yard where we were fanning. On hearing the fan stop, he left immediately and came to the spot where we were. He hastily inquired what the matter was. Bill answered that I was sick and there was no one to bring wheat to the fan. I had by this time crawled away from the side of the post and rail fence by which the yard was enclosed, hoping to find relief by getting out of the sun. He then asked where I was. He was told by one of the hands. He came to the spot and after looking at me a while, asked me what was the matter. I told him as well as I could, for I scarce had strength to speak. He then gave me a savage kick to the side and told me to get up. I tried to do so, but fell back in the attempt. He gave me another kick and it told me to rise. I again tried and succeeded in gaining my feet. But stooping to get the tub with which I was feeding the fan, I again staggered and fell. While down in this situation, Mr. Covey took up the hickory slat with which Hughes had been striking off the half-bushel measure. With it, gave me a heavy blow upon the head, making a large wound, and the blood ran freely, and with this again told me to get up. I made no effort to comply, having now made up my mind to let him do his worst. In a short time after receiving this blow, my head grew better. Mr. Covey had now left me to my fate. At this moment, I resolved, for the first time, to go to my master, enter a complaint, and ask his protection. In order to do this, I must that afternoon walk 7 miles, and this, under the circumstances, was truly a severe undertaking. I was exceedingly feeble, made so as much by the kicks and blows which I received as by the severe fit of sickness to which I had been subjected. I, however, watched my chance while Covey was looking in an opposite direction and started for St. Michael's. I succeeded in getting considerable distance on my way to the woods when Covey discovered me and called after me to come back, threatening what he would do if I did not come. I disregarded both his calls and his threats and made my way to the woods as fast as my feeble state would allow, and thinking I might be overhauled by him if I kept the road, I walked through the woods, keeping far enough from the road to avoid detection and near enough to prevent losing my way. I had not gone far before my little strength again failed me. I could go no further. I fell down and laid for a considerable time. The blood was yet oozing from the wound on my head. For a time I thought I should bleed to death, and think now that I should have done so, but that blood so matted my hair as to stop the wound. After lying there for about 3/4 of an hour, I nerved myself up again and started on my way, through bogs and briars, barefooted and bareheaded, tearing my feet sometimes at nearly every step. And after a journey of about 7 miles, occupying more than 5 hours to perform it, I arrived at Master's store. I then presented an appearance enough to affect any but a heart of iron. From the crown of my head to my feet, I was covered with blood. My hair was all clotted with dust and blood. My shirt was stiff with blood. My legs and feet were torn in sundry places with briars and thorns, and were also covered with blood. I suppose I looked like a man who had escaped a den of wild beasts, and barely escaped them. In this state, I appeared before my master, humbly entreating him to interpose his authority for my protection. I told him all the circumstances as well I could, and it seemed as I spoke at times to affect him. He would then walk the floor and seek to justify Covey by saying he expected I deserved it. He asked me what I wanted. I told him to let me get a new home, that as sure as I lived with Mr. Covey again, I should live but to die with him, that Covey would surely kill me. He was in a fair way for it. Master Thomas ridiculed the idea that there was any danger of Mr. Covey's killing me, and said that he knew Mr. Covey, that he was a good man, and that he could not think of taking me from him. That should he do so, he would lose the whole year's wages, that I belonged to Mr. Covey for 1 year, and that I must go back to him, come what might, and that I must not trouble him with any more stories, or that he would himself get hold of me. After threatening me with thus, he gave me a very large dose of salt, telling me that I might remain in St. Michael's that night, it being quite late, but then I must be off back to Mr. Covey's early in the morning, and that if I did not, he would get hold of me, which meant that he would whip me. I remained all night, and according to his orders, I started off to Covey's in the morning, Saturday morning, wearing in body wearied in body and broken in spirit. I got no supper that night or breakfast that morning. I reached Covey's about 9 o'clock, and just as I was getting over the fence that divided Mrs. Kemp's fields from ours, out ran Covey with his cowskin to give me another whipping. Before he could reach me, I succeeded in getting to the cornfield, and as the corn was very high, it afforded me the means of hiding. He seemed very angry and searched for me a long time. My behavior was altogether unaccountable. He finally gave up the chase, thinking, I suppose, that I must come home for something to eat. He would give himself no further trouble in looking for me. I spent that day mostly in the woods, having the alternative before me, to go home and be whipped to death, or stay in the woods and be starved to death. That night I fell in with Sandy Jenkins, a slave with whom I was somewhat acquainted. Sandy had a free wife who lived about 4 miles from Mr. Covey's, and it being Saturday, he was on his way to see her. I told him my circumstances, and he very kindly invited me to go home with him. I went home with him and talked this whole matter over, and got his advice as to what course it was best for me to pursue. I found Sandy an old adviser. He told me with great solemnity, solemnity, oh my words. I must go back to Covey, but that before I went, I must go with him into another part of the woods, where there was a certain root which, if I would take some of it with me, carrying it always on my right side, it would render it impossible for Mr. Covey or any other white man to whip me. Oh, that's going to bug me. He said he had carried it for years, and since he had done so, he had never received a blow, never expected to while he carried it. I at first rejected this idea. Then the simple carrying of a root in my pocket would have any such effect as he had said, and was not disposed to take it. But Sandy impressed the necessity with earnestness, telling me it could do no harm if it did no good. It could do no harm if it did no good. To please him, I at length took the root, and according to his direction, carried it upon my right side. This was Sunday morning. I immediately started for home, and upon entering the yard gate, out came Mr. Covey, on his way to meeting. He spoke to me very kindly, bade me drive the pigs from a lot nearby, and passed on towards the church. Now, this singular conduct of Mr. Covey really made me begin to think that there was something to the root which Sandy had given me, and had it been on any other day than Sunday, I could have attributed the conduct to no other cause than the influence of that root. And as it was, I was half inclined to think the root to be something more than I at first had taken it to be. All went well till Monday morning. On this morning, the virtue of the root was fully tested. Long before daylight, I was called to go and rub, curry, and feed the horses. I obeyed and was glad to obey. But whilst thus engaged, whilst in the act of throwing down some blades from the loft, Mr. Covey entered the stable with a long rope. And just as I was half out of the loft, he caught hold of my legs and was about tying me. As soon as I found what he was up to, I gave a sudden spring, and I did so. He holding onto my legs, I was brought up sprawling on the stable floor. Mr. Covey seemed now to think he had me and could do what he pleased. But at this moment, from whence came the spirit I don't know, I resolved to fight, and suiting my actions to the resolution, I seized Covey hard by the throat, and as I did so, I rose. He held on to me and I to him. My resistance was so entirely unexpected that Covey seemed taken aback. He trembled like a leaf. This gave me assurance, and I held him uneasy, causing the blood to run where I touched him with the ends of my fingers. Mr. Covey soon called out to Hughes for help. Hughes came, and while Covey held me, attempted to tie my right hand. While he was in the act of doing so, I watched my chance and gave him a heavy kick close under the ribs. This kick fairly sickened Hughes so that he left me in the hands of Mr. Covey. This kick had the effect of not only weakening Hughes, but Covey also. You go, Frederick. When he saw, come on, it's blocking me. Don't block me. When he saw Hughes bending over with pain, his courage quailed. He asked me if I meant to persist in my resistance. I told him I did, come what might, that he had used me like a brute for 6 months and that I was determined to be used no longer. With that, he strove to drag me to a stick that was lying just out of the stable door. He meant to knock me down, but just as he was leaning over to get the stick, I seized him with both hands by his collar and brought him by a sudden snatch to the ground. By this time, Bill came. Covey called upon him for assistance. Bill wanted to know what he could do. Covey said, "Take hold of him, take hold of him." Bill said his master hired him out to work and not to help to whip me. So he left Covey and myself to fight our own battle out. We were at it for nearly 2 hours. Oh my. Covey at length let me go, puffing and blowing at a great rate, saying that if I had not resisted, he would not have whipped me half so much. The truth was that he had not whipped me at all. I considered him as getting entirely the worst end of the bargain, for he had drawn no blood from me, but I had from him. The whole 6 months afterwards that I spent with Mr. Covey, he never laid the weight of his finger upon me in anger. He would occasionally say he didn't want to get a hold of me again. No, thought I, you need not, for you will come off worse than you did before. This battle with Mr. Covey was the turning point in my career as a slave. It rekindled the few expiring embers of freedom and revived within me a sense of my own manhood. It recalled the departed self-confidence and inspired me again with the determination to be free. The gratification afforded by the triumphant was a full compensation for whatever else might follow, even death itself. He can only understand the deep satisfaction which I experienced. Who has who who has himself repelled by force the blade arm of slavery. I felt as I never felt before. It was a glorious resurrection. From the tomb of slavery to the heaven of freedom, my long crushed spirit rose, cowardice departed, bold defiance took its place, and now I resolve that however long I might remain a slave in form, the day had passed forever when I could be a slave in fact. I did not hesitate to let it be known of me that the white man who expected to succeed in whipping must also succeed in killing me. From this time, I was never again what might be called fairly whipped, though I remained a slave 4 years afterwards. I had several fights, but was never whipped. It was for a long time a matter of surprise to me why Mr. Covey did not immediately have me taken by the constable to the whipping post and there regularly whipped for the crime of raising my hand against a white man in defense of myself, and the only explanation I can now think of does not entirely satisfy me. But such as it is, I will give it. Mr. Covey enjoyed the most unbound reputation for being a first-rate overseer and Negro breaker. It was of considerable importance to him. That reputation was at stake, and had he sent me, a boy of about 16 years old, to the public whipping post, his reputation would have been lost. So, to save his reputation, he suffered me to go unpunished. My term of actual service to Mr. Edward Covey ended on Christmas Day, 1833. The days between Christmas and New Year's Day are allowed as holidays, and accordingly, we were not required to perform any labor, more than to feed and take care of the stock. This time we regarded as our own by the grace of our masters, and we therefore used or abused it nearly as we pleased. Those of us who had families at a distance were generally allowed to spend the whole 6 days in their society. This time, however, was spent in various ways. The staid, sober, thinking, and industrious ones of our number would employ themselves in making corn brooms, mats, horse collars, and baskets, and another class of us would spend the time in hunting opossums, hares, and coons. But by far the larger part engaged in such sports and merriments as playing ball, wrestling, running foot races, fiddling, dancing, and drinking whiskey. And this latter mode of spending the time was by far the most agreeable to the feelings of our masters. A slave who would work during the holidays was considered by our masters as scarcely deserving them. He was regarded as one who rejected the favor of his master. It was deemed a disgrace not to get drunk at Christmas, and he was regarded as lazy indeed, who had not provided himself with the necessary means during the year to get whiskey enough to last him through the Christmas. From what I know of the effect of these holidays upon the slave, I believe them to be among the most effective means in the hands of the slaveholder in keeping down the spirit of the insurrection. Were the slaveholders at once to abandon this practice? I have not the slightest doubt it would lead to an immediate insurrection among the slaves. These holidays serve as conductors or safety valves to carry off the rebellious spirit of enslaved humanity. But for these, the slave would be forced up to the wildest desperation, and woe betide the slaveholder the day he ventures to remove or hinder the operation of those conductors. I warn him, in such an event, a spirit would go forth in their midst, more to be dreaded than the most appalling earthquake. The holidays are a part and parcel of the gross fraud, wrong, and inhumanity. The holidays are part and parcel of the gross fraud, wrong, and inhumanity of slavery. They are professedly a custom established by the benevolence of the slaveholders, but I undertake to say it is the result of selfishness and one of the grossest frauds committed upon the downtrodden slave. They do not give the slaves this time because they would not like to have their work during its continuance, I'm sorry, would not like to have their work during its continuance, but because they know it would be unsafe to deprive them of it. This will be seen by the fact that the slaveholders like to have their slaves spend those days just in such a manner as to make them as glad of their ending as of their beginning. Their object seems to be to disgust their slaves with freedom by plunging them into the lowest depths of dissipation. For instance, the slaveholders not only like to see the slave drink of his own accord, but will adopt various plans to make him drunk. One plan is to make bets on their slaves as to who can drink the most whiskey without getting drunk, and in this way they succeed in getting whole multitudes to drink excess. Thus, when the slave asks for virtuous freedom, the cunning slaveholder, knowing his ignorance, cheats him with a dose of vicious dispens. Hang on a second. Oops. Dispensation, artfully labeled with the name of liberty. The most of us used to drink it down, and the result was just what might be supposed. Many of us were led to think that there were little to choose between liberty and slavery. We felt, and very properly too, that we had almost as well be slaves as to man as to rum. We felt, as very properly too, that we had almost as well be slaves to man as to rum. So, when the holidays ended, we staggered up from the filth of our wallowing, took a long breath, and marched to the field, feeling, upon the whole, rather glad to go from what our master had deceived us into belief was freedom, back to the arms of slavery. Just such evilness, just such pure evilness and cunning, and just, I mean, it's just even beyond evil. I have said that this mode of treatment is part of a whole system of fraud and inhumanity of slavery. It is so. I mean, it's not unlike what's going on and has been going on. It never really stopped. It just took a turn, a turn. It is so. The mode here adopted to disgust the slave with freedom by allowing him to see only the abuse of it is carried out in other things. For instance, a slave loves molasses. He steals some. His master, in many cases, goes off to town and buys a large quantity. He returns, takes his whip, and commands the slave to eat the molasses until the poor fellow is made sick at the very mention of it. The same mode is sometimes adopted to make the slaves refrain from asking for more food than their regular allowance. A slave runs through his allowance and applies for more. His master is enraged at him, but not willing to send him off without food, gives him more than is necessary and compels him to eat it within a given time. Then, if he complains that he cannot eat it, he is said to be satisfied neither full nor fasting and is whipped for being hard to please. I have an abundance of such illustrations of the same principle drawn from my own observation, but think the cases I have cited sufficient. The practice is a very common one. Let me check my battery here. Oh, it's getting low. Hang on one second. Let me plug this in. This is my old MacBook that I'm reading from. Let me stretch for a second. So, Ooh, 1 hour. I'm still in chapter 10. So it's just going to be 9 and 10 for tonight. Because, here we go. My throat, oops. Oh, it's not long enough. Okay. All right. Let's get through this then. I have cited sufficient. The, the practice is a very common one. On the 1st of January, 1834, I left Mr. Covey's and went to live with Mr. William Freeland, who lived about 3 miles from St. Michael's. I soon found Mr. Freeland a very different man from Mr. Covey. Though not rich, he was what would be called an educated Southern gentleman. Mr. Covey, as I have shown, was a well-trained Negro breaker and a slave driver. The former, slaveholder though he was, seemed to possess some regard for honor, some reverence for justice, and some respect for humanity. The latter seemed totally insensible to all such sentiments. Mr. Freeland had many of the faults peculiar to slaveholders, such as being very passionate and fretful, but I must do him the justice to say that he was exceedingly free from those degrading vices to which Mr. Covey was constantly addicted. The one was open and frank, and we always knew where to find him. The other was a most artful deceiver, and could be understood only by such as was skillful enough to detect his cunningly devised frauds. Another advantage I gained in my new master was he made no pretensions. He made no pretensions to or profession of religion, and this, in my opinion, was truly a great advantage. I assert most unhesitatingly that the religion of the South is a mere covering for the most horrid crimes. Still is. A justifier of the most appalling barbarity, a sanctifier of the most hateful frauds, a dark shelter under which the darkest, foulest, grossest, and most infernal deeds of slaveholders find the strongest protection. This, word for word, is what happens now. It never, ever, ever stopped. Never. Now, it might have not even tamped down, but was, like um, hidden, but still there. And then, the fat felon, piggy felon, um, unleashed it like out into the open. It never went away, ever. But word for word, that's exactly what these Christians do, Southern or otherwise. Were I to be again reduced to the chains of slavery next to that enslavement, I should regard being the slave of religion. I should regard being the slave of a religious master the greatest calamity that could befall me. For of all slaveholders with whom I ever met, religious slaveholders are the worst. I have I have ever found them the meanest and basest, the most cruel and cowardly of all others. It was my unhappy lot not to only to belong to a religious slaveholder, but to live in a community of such religionists. Very near Mr. Freeland lived Reverend Daniel Whedon, and in the same neighborhood lived the Reverend Rigby Hopkins. These were members and ministers in the Reformed Methodist Church. Mr. Whedon owned, among others, a woman slave whose name I have forgotten. This woman's back for weeks was kept literally raw, made so by the lash of this merciless religious wretch. He used to hire hands. His maxim was, behave well or behave ill. It is the duty of a master occasionally to whip a slave, to remind him of his master's authority. Such was his theory and such his practice. Mr. Hopkins was even worse than Mr. Whedon. His chief boast was his ability to manage slaves. The peculiar feature of his government was that of whipping slaves in advance of deserving it. He always managed to have one or more of his slaves to whip every Monday morning. He did this to alarm their fears and strike terror into those who escaped. His plan was to whip for the smallest offenses, to prevent the commission of large ones. Mr. Hopkins could always find some excuse for whipping a slave. It would astonish one unaccustomed to a slaveholding life to see with what wrongful ease a slaveholder can find things of which to make occasion to whip a slave. A mere look, word, or motion, a mistake, accident, or want of power are all matters for which a slave may be whipped at any time. Does the slave look dissatisfied? It is said he has the devil in him and it must be whipped out. Does he speak loudly when spoken to by his master? Then he is getting high minded and should be taken down a buttonhole lower. Does he forget to pull off his hat at the approach of a white person? Then he is wanting in reverence and should be whipped for it. Does he ever venture to vindicate his conduct when censured for it? Then he is guilty of impudence and one of the greatest crimes of which a slave can be guilty. Impudence. It's not impudence, it's impudence. One of the greatest crimes of which a slave can be guilty. Does he ever venture to suggest a different mode of doing things than pointed out by his master? He is indeed presumptuous and getting above himself, and nothing less than a flogging will do for him. Does he want does he, while plowing, break a plow, or while hoeing break a hoe? It is owing to his carelessness, and for it a slave must always be whipped. Mr. Hopkins could always find something of this sort to justify the use of the lash. He seldom failed to embrace such opportunities. There was not a man in the whole country with whom the slaves who had the getting their own home would not prefer to live rather than there was not a man in the whole county with whom the slaves who had the getting their own home would not prefer to live rather than this Reverend Mr. Hopkins. And yet there was not a man anywhere round who made higher professions of religion or was more active in revivals, more attentive to the class, love feasts, prayer, and preaching meetings, or more devotional in his family, that prayed earlier, later, louder, and longer than this same Reverend slave driver, Rigby Hopkins. But to return to Mr. Freeland and to my experience while in his employment, he, like Mr. Covey, gave us enough to eat, but unlike Mr. Covey, he also gave us sufficient time to take our meals. He worked us hard, but always between sunrise and sunset. He required a good deal of work to be done, but gave us good tools with which to work. His farm was large, but he employed hands enough to work it, and with ease compared with many of his neighbors, My treatment while in his employment was heavenly compared with what I experienced at the hands of Mr. Edward Covey. Mr. Freeland was himself the owner of but two slaves. Their names were Henry Harris and John Harris. The rest of his hands he hired. These consisted of myself, Sandy Jenkins, there's an asterisk there. This is the same man who gave me the roots to prevent my being whipped by Mr. Covey. He was a clever soul. We used to frequently talk about the fight with Mr. Covey, and as often as we did so, he would claim my success as the result of the roots which he gave me. This superstition is very common among the more ignorant slaves. A slave seldom dies, but his death is attributed to trickery. And Handy, so these consist of myself, Sandy Jenkins, and Handy Caldwell. Henry and John were quite intelligent, and in a very little while after I went there, I succeeded in creating in them a strong desire to learn how to read. This desire soon sprang up in the others too. They very soon mustered up some old spelling books, and nothing would do but I must keep a. They very soon mustered up some old spelling books, and nothing would do but I must keep a Sabbath school. I agreed to do so, and accordingly devoted my Sundays to teaching these loved fellow slaves how to read. Neither of them knew his letters, but when I went there, some of the slaves of the neighboring farms found what was going on and also availed themselves of this little opportunity to learn to read. It was understood among all who came that there must be as little display about it as possible. It was necessary to keep our religious masters at St. Michael's unacquainted with the fact that instead of spending the Sabbath in wrestling, boxing, and drinking whiskey, we were trying to learn how to read the will of God. They had much rather see us engaged in those degrading sports than to see us behaving like intellectual, moral, and accountable beings. My blood boils. Let me check my battery. My blood boils as I think of the bloody manner in which Messrs. Wright Fairbanks and Garrison West, both class leaders in connection with many others, rushed in upon us with sticks and stones and broke up our virtuous little Sabbath school at St. Michael's, all calling themselves Christians, humble followers of the Lord Jesus Christ. But I am again digressing. I held my Sabbath school at the house of a free colored man, whose name I deem it imprudent to mention, for should it be known, it might embarrass him greatly. Though the crime of holding the school was committed 10 years ago, I had at one time over 40 scholars, and those of the right sort, ardently desiring to learn. They were of all ages, though mostly men and women. I look back to those Sundays with an amount of pleasure not to be expressed. They were great days to my soul. The work of instructing my dear fellow slaves was the sweetest engagement with which I was ever blessed. We loved each other, and to leave them at the close of the Sabbath was a severe cross indeed. When I think of these precious souls, hang on one second. It's like something is missing. What's missing? Are today shut up in the prison house of slavery, my feelings overcome me, and I am almost ready to ask, does a righteous God govern the universe? And for what does he hold the thunders in his right hand, if not to smite the oppressor and deliver the spoiled out of the hand of the spoiler? These dear souls came not to Sabbath school because it was popular to do so, nor did I teach them because it was reputable to be thus engaged. Every moment they spent in that school, they were liable to be taken up and given 39 lashes. They came because they wished to learn. Their minds had been starved by their cruel masters. They had been shut up in mental darkness. I taught them because it was the delight of my soul to be doing something that I looked like bettering the condition of my race. I kept up my school nearly the whole year I lived with Mr. Freeland, and besides my Sabbath school, I devoted 3 evenings in the week during the winter to teaching the slaves at home. And I had the happiness to know that several of those who came to Sabbath school learned how to read, and that one, at least, is now free through my agency. The year passed off smoothly. It seemed only about half as long as the year which preceded it. I went through it without receiving a single blow. I will give Mr. Freeland the credit of being the best master I ever had till I became my own master. For the ease with which I passed the year, I was, however, somewhat indebted to the society of my fellow slaves. They were noble souls. They not only possessed loving hearts, but brave ones. We were linked and interlinked with each other. I loved them with a love stronger than anything I have experienced since. It is sometimes said that we slaves do not love and confide in each other. In answer to this assertion, I can say I never loved or confided in any people more than my fellow slaves, and especially those with whom I lived at Mr. Freeland's. I believe would have I believe we would have died for each other. We never undertook to do anything of any importance without a mutual consultation. We never moved separately. We were one, as so much so by our tempers and dispositions, as by the mutual hardships to which we were necessarily subjected by our conditions as slaves. At the close of the year of 1834, Mr. Freeland again hired me of my master for the year 1835. But by this time, I began to want to live upon free land as well as with Freeland. And I was no longer content, therefore, to live with him or any other slaveholder. I began with the commencement of the year to prepare myself for a final struggle, which would which should decide my fate one way or the other. My tendency was upward. I was fast approaching manhood, and year after year had passed, and I was still a slave. These thoughts roused me. I must do something, and therefore resolved that 1835 should not pass without witnessing attempt on my part to secure my liberty. But I was not willing to cherish this determination alone. My fellow slaves were dear to me. I was anxious to have them participate with me in this my life-giving determination. I therefore, though with great prudence, commenced early to ascertain their views and feelings in regard to their condition and to imbue their minds with thoughts of freedom. I bent myself to devising ways and means for our escape, and meanwhile strove on all fitting occasions to impress them with the gross fraud and inhumanity of slavery. All right, I'm going to have to pause right here because I'm going to have to hang on one second. Thoughts I didn't mean for escape. Meanwhile, strove. Let's see where we're at here. I think we're still in chapter. Oops. All right, I think I'm going to end it here because I think this is a lot longer of a chapter than I expected, and it's already an hour and a half, and my throat is getting tighter, my mouth is getting drier, and I will continue. Oops. I will continue tomorrow. I might do it tomorrow, like early, like tomorrow during the day, and sit in a different spot to where I could be comfortable and kind of like be comfortable, um, and get through as many chapters as I can because we only have a couple more days to the end of Black History Month. So I do want to finish this. So I'm going to end it there. And Frederick is on the precipice of escaping, and he's talking with his fellow friends and, trying to devise a plan and if they're going to be willing to go with him. So I never heard of him escaping with, let me plug this in before it dies on me, with anybody but himself. But it was a long time since I remember the history of Frederick. All right. So with that, I'm going to say goodnight. Thanks for joining me. I will continue tomorrow. I'll probably start earlier in the afternoon because I'm going to read as much as I can because I do want to finish his narrative before the end of the month. So have a good night, and hopefully we don't get slammed with the snowstorm, but they keep talking about it. All right. Good night, everyone. Good night.